Welcome to the Stockout. So this is your show for the CPG and retail industries. If I'm a little bit small, it's because I have a standing desk. It's stuck at the wrong height. But we'll make do with what we have. I'm one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel, joined by Grace Sharkey. And Grace, you've been following the fires out west, wrote an article to that effect. And you're a broker for a long time. So I wanted to ask you, what does your day look like when you're a broker and there's a natural disaster? I'm sure you've lived through a number of them with hurricanes and floods and those type of things.
Yeah, I think the big one for me was when we saw a lot of those hurricanes in the Houston area. That was a big one that we went through. And, it is, especially right now when you're kind of in the midst of it all, is really scary because not only, right, you are concerned about the freight, but you potentially have drivers, of course, that you really, really care about and have families as well that you are working on getting a hold of and figuring out where they are, dependent, if they were going into the area or if right now, maybe, for instance, according to the article, right, are delivering some of these goods that are needed now after the fires. It's there's a lot of danger that goes into that. So, it's every day. I think a lot of brokers right now, especially those who are working in that area, imagine like all the drayage carriers, especially, et cetera. I'm sure phone calls are being made, making sure that capacity is still there, if it's still operating, figuring out what's online, what's not. I mean, that's the other crazy part of it all too, as companies, do start to go online, those that are saved, which, I mean, we'll get into this in a little bit as well, like whatever is left, what companies can take goods in, right? They are going to want those moved, but figuring out, if receivers are available, if vendors are available, there's so many different links, right? In a regular supply chain, you're really spending a lot of time making those extra phone calls and doing the due diligence. And I would say the same thing for any drivers out there, right? If you're delivering into the area, make sure you're getting extra cell phone numbers, contact numbers that, right, you're not worried just on, or you're not working just on the infrastructure that you're normally used to, because even phone lines are going to be down, right? So you're going to want to call individuals maybe on their cell for deliveries. There might be some weird delivery locations or some different routing clearly that you're going to have to make. And I think there's just a lot of guessing right now, which makes it hard to quote, which makes it hard to guess capacity in areas. And it's just a lot of almost like double checking all of your bases, and then at the same time trying to manage what business is there and what's available. And I mean, this I think is another huge point too. And then we have the aftermath, which is rebuilding everything. And between you and me, Mike, I mean, that could end up being much more than even what we saw in Louisiana back in that time, and Hurricane Katrina. And that's a huge amount of freight that could potentially be pushed into that area at the same time. So it's almost like a grieving process. I'm sure a lot of the brokers right now are kind of in this like shock moment where it's just like reacting to what you can and figuring out kind of at the very last second what you can move and what you can't move. And then the aftermath, which is the bittersweet aspect of this industry, right, is that with natural disasters like this come a ton of rebuilding. I mean, I think I was just looking at numbers of potentially up to uh, projected between 135 billion and 150 billion dollars in losses. That's just economic losses, but insurers exceed 20 billion. So that's a lot of building materials, a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done, that I think after the state of shock that brokers go into, then will be a positive experience for those as well.
Yeah, the publicly traded company that always seemed to benefit from rebuilding was Landstar, because Landstar has large agent-based network. It can source a lot of flatbed capacity. Would imagine that's
Yeah.
true this time as well. So there'll be more on the site regarding the LA fires. We're going to get into CPG and retail news and outlook, and there's really lots to talk about. And before I do that, if anyone has not already signed up for the Stockout newsletter or Fraud Watch newsletter, or any of the newsletters, you can just go to freightwaves.com. Up at the top under newsletters, second one under market insights, there's the Stockout, and then Grace's Fraud Watch, second one under trending now. I want to get into this first story, which was, I thought, the best article that I saw on retail industry in the last week, written by Retail Dive, which talked about the retail trends to watch this year. And they called out 8 retail trends. So I'll go through these quickly. If there's anything you want to add, Grace, to any of these topics, just interrupt me. The first one, uncertain outlook for distressed retailers. It does seem like the larger retailers have taken share overall from some of the smaller mid-sized ones, and then a lot of the smaller retailers under a little bit of financial pressure. You've seen that with companies like Big Lots, which filed for bankruptcy, companies like Burlington. So some of those may go away, some of those may get acquired, but a lot of uncertain outlook for some of the retailers that are under financial distress. Second trend they call out here is that they think the deal making will continue. And so in terms like Elon Musk was right about Lena Khan no longer being the head of the FTC. So she's going to be replaced by Andrew Ferguson. Does seem like maybe the FTC is going to be more accepting of large mergers. I mean, last year we saw Saks Fifth Avenue acquire Neiman Marcus. We had the Kroger Albertsons acquisition, which ended up being thwarted. But this Retail Dive's expecting a large number of additional mergers to the extent that they can get approved. And it does seem like maybe the supply chain and back office is a lot to do with the rationale for some of these mergers. I think that was a large part of the rationale for the Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus merger, where they have sort of a common clientele, common inventory, can do a lot, sort of leverage the capabilities of the sort of last mile and e-commerce, those type of things. So expect more deal making. Number 3, uncertainty around DEI. A lot of companies stepping back from DEI. A lot of activist investors pushing companies to get out of it. Costco was going the other way and saying, "Oh, it's still important. We're going to continue with it." Does seem to me like DEI, like anything else, can be taken too far. So uncertainty about whether those plans are going to continue and to the extent that they're going to continue. The fourth item they had, and I would have ranked this maybe the first item, is the tariffs are going to influence the value proposition that retailers can deliver. It's something that the National Retail Federation has made a lot of noise about. An interesting quote from Lowe's that they said about 40% of their supplies are sourced overseas. I'm sure for a lot of retailers, it's a lot higher than that. If you start getting in these categories like shoes and apparel, it's virtually everything. And then they also say that some of these off-priced retailers won't feel as much impact. I think they're talking about like a TJ Maxx, which gets its supplies from these other domestic companies, so they wouldn't be the ones bearing the impact of the tariffs, at least not directly. The fifth thing Retail Dive calls out is the specifics around shrink mitigation remain elusive as retailers' tactics backfire. So talk about what the retailers have done to prevent shrink. It's things like locking up the deodorant behind glass, which consumers just absolutely hate because they just want to get in, get their deodorant, and leave. So that seems to have been backfired a little bit.
I do want to jump
General.
into that. I was going to say, I do want to jump into the shrink one really quick, because I think that one does, I think, really concern me in regards to one, combating fraud, which we've talked about even in the last episode, right, with fraudulent returns being a part of that too, and a lot of the fraud numbers that have been put out by a number of companies. The NRF has brought this up, include the shrinkage aspect too. So I think really what these companies are trying to do, right, with some of these protocols is really figure out, right, what is truly fraud, what is just being lost in transit, and what they can do to I think secure those goods. But I will say, as someone who has probably seen this even more in stores recently, we've also talked about, right, the fact that I think sometimes the shrinkage work can combat a lot of sales, right? Like if I know going to a Dollar General means I'm going to have to ask for someone's help to get something like, I noticed the other day I was in there and they have like candles behind the like glass things now. It's like, well, then I'm just going to order these offline, or I'm going to find some other way to do it that's less of a disturbance in my day. And I'm probably not going to go to Dollar General, which means I'm probably not going to buy the other things that I was going to maybe potentially pick up there, right? So I think that's a big one. And I think it wraps into the fraud aspect too that we talk about as well.
Yeah, it's a lot to balance because they want the transaction to be as seamless, as frictionless as possible, but they also
Yeah.
don't want to give a lot back and shrink. And you want to trust your customers when they say that there was a porch pirate stole my box, that they don't just want another free item or free something or other. I mean, it was interesting that REI is no longer accepting returns from certain customers, but only certain customers that have a history of returning a lot of goods. So they basically have two return policies: one if you're on this list, and one if you're not on the list. And I think other companies probably do that too, or are going to do that. It's just not going to be maybe as obvious. Um, so yeah, so a lot to unpack there with shrink. Another trend that Retail Dive called out was this direct to consumer brands starting to lose a little bit of relevance, and it just seems to me like the direct to consumer brands, they have to take some angle, and they're not gonna have the economies of scale as the larger brands. So oftentimes they have to go up market, and maybe that's not something people want. Right now with inflation and cost of living crisis and all of those things. So they do seem to be losing a little bit of relevance. They talked about how some have been acquired by larger companies, the ones that have been successful. And it does seem to be part of this trend where shoppers are consolidating purchases with a few large, retailers. Another trend they called out was department stores need a change in order to survive. There's some that there's activist involvement, private equity involvement. So some of those investors, maybe the ones that drive the strategy. So I think you'll see the strategy change for a lot of those department stores. Macy's and Kohl's are closing stores. I think a lot of them are kind of maybe just too stuck in the middle where they don't really give consumers a reason to go in. So you may see some changes there. And then this last one is this customer experience continues to evolve, and we'll see what the customer experience is. Is it going to be, something that is seamless, like Walmart envisions you taking out your cell phone and scanning whatever products you need and just walking out the door? Are more retailers going to go to things like that, or is there going to be more AI adoption where they know essentially what you need before you need it, and can sort of fill out your basket for you? So I think there's a lot that is going to change there with the customer experience. Would agree with Retail Dive on that. So those were the 8 things that they called out. Grace, would you call anything else out that they might have missed?
So the one thing I think that I want to say Friday, right? The news dropped that TikTok is looking to, I guess, follow through with a U.S. ban on January 19th. Now, again, I think there's still time for that to fall apart. So potentially, we'll use the word potentially in this situation, but honestly, I think this could be a huge deal, especially for the marketing aspect for a lot of retailers. And in particular, too, I think a lot of small and medium sized companies could have some problems with this. Just diving into some of the numbers, 73% of consumers just this holiday alone planned on using TikTok for the holiday shopping, and 59% did make direct purchases on TikTok Shop. I know it's a big thing for small businesses who saw up to 2,000% increase in sales once they were on TikTok, and a number of those go viral. And I think this has been brought up a number of times. A lot of retailers as well have gone different items that they're selling have gone viral on TikTok, which have led to higher in-store sales. And I mean, that's a whole marketing aspect for these companies that a lot of times they don't even have to put a dollar into. I think that's what's fascinating about a platform like TikTok, is just all it takes is the right person on the right day to fall into the algorithm and into your timeline at the perfect moment for something as silly as, not retail related, but like, what is it, Chili's like mozzarella sticks to go viral, and now it's like the biggest thing that Chili's is selling at the moment in time. So the same thing, you see a certain skirt that Taylor Swift wore goes viral, and now that small business is booming and is seeing an insane profit that they never expected, without again having to spend close to $1 on any marketing efforts at all. 82% of retailers said that they look to increase more of their marketing on these platforms. I as much as we see him in the interwebs today, I think Zuckerberg, right, is hoping that that audience moves to one of his platforms, the Meta platform, or of course Instagram, and sees that difference. But at the same time, we statistically haven't seen as a performance as we've seen from TikTok and bringing that turnaround for consumers and retailers as well. So that then you add the influencers who are all using these TikTok, right, to sell their products to small businesses. As much as we don't want to call influencers small business owners, depending on their business, they do fall in that category.
Mhm.
And that whole culture of it all. I mean, that just the idea of spending online and using these online tools, seeing that this disruption could easily take place, I think is pretty scary for those individuals. And I'm sure there's retail marketing departments across the United States today that are kind of panicking and trying to figure out how they're going to maneuver around this. But I mean, to say that this isn't going to be a huge aspect to retailers in 2025 is huge. And I don't know what platform. I think what we're looking at is probably right. We'll see it on Instagram would potentially take over. But there's still, I think, some flaws in what's making TikTok Shop as affluent as it is today.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like all these companies would really need to identify like who their audience is that they're trying to expand with, and then which influencers they're following, which channels they're following, and then target those channels, which is probably a far better use of advertising dollars than any sort of more traditional type of media. So yeah, I would agree with you for sure on that. Another trend that we'll move on to this next story is CPG are starting to focus more on volume rather than just price and profitability. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal to that effect, which it seems like the CPG companies have increased prices about as much as they can increase them without it really hurting volume. And so they're taking a different tactic now where they're trying to introduce new products, acquire certain brands, expand those brands, doing more with marketing, some new takes on familiar products. Some of those I thought were kind of silly, mystery flavored Twinkies. I think I'll pass on that one. And the exception would be if there's really are ingredients that are more expensive. Seen a lot of inflation in cocoa and eggs, for instance. Those are you are going to see those with higher prices at the CPG retail price. But for the most part, it seems like the retail prices, they're still about, let's call it 30% more, maybe in some cases more than that versus 2019. So certainly the rate of inflation is slowing, and they're trying to find more tactics to increase volume. But I want to see if you had any thoughts on this. I guess my initial thought was that really this is kind of a reversal of some of the recent tactics from CPG companies where it was a lot of rationalizing of the SKUs, so they have fewer SKUs so they can turn those SKUs quicker and have a leaner supply chain that's more efficient. It seems like some of these tactics to increase volume, get people excited about a new product, is going to make supply chains more complicated.
Yeah, it's because here's the thing. I think a lot of these new products and like different different ways of producing them have had really high payoffs. A very small example is the Nerds clusters, right? Like blown up for the Nerds brand, and it's I want to say like historically outselling just the regular Nerds or the Nerds rope, right? And that is kind of the same thing, like a twist on something that's always been a classic. And we're seeing more and more of that. And when they do hit, they hit very well. But I agree. I think a lot of time, investment, and potential new ingredients could make that more difficult. Again, I think we're still waiting to see if there's any changes in kind of what goes in our foods too that potentially could change some of these prices. So I do fear maybe what we'll see in terms of those changes affecting prices. I agree with you that I don't think there's anything left besides that to continue to raise them. But I think what's interesting is I just don't see prices coming down anytime soon. And then I'm interested in your perspective, right? Just following CPG, Mike, do you see a way, a clear path down the line for these companies to start bringing prices down that are outside of the realm of what we've recently seen, which is kind of like, rebottling, kind of tricking the eye into thinking, well, I'm paying less, but actually it's 2 ounces less in the bottle than there was before. But yeah, for you, Mike, do you see any potential route where we start to see some of these prices come down from CPG companies as well?
So I'm not sure so much about the actual retail ticket prices. I do think you'll see more buy one get one free type of deals. Buy two get one
Sure.
free. I mean, those type of promotions more so than the retail price. I mean, the thing with the retail price is once the consumers get accustomed to a little bit higher price, those tend to be sticky, and they don't the retail the CPG companies don't want to get into a situation where they have to cut them again only to raise them again, because consumers notice the price increases more so than anything else. So if something was, let's say, $3.99 before the pandemic, and now it's $4.99 or $5.25, they don't want to get in a situation where they take it down to $4.50 to only increase it where it's $5.25 again. And then the consumer gets upset that you've increased the price to $5.25, and even though that's what it was, a year ago. But if you just run the promotion and say you get one free if you buy two of them, then you don't have that problem. So I do think you'll see a little bit more of those promotions. But the CPG companies, I mean, they really are protective of their margins also. So they don't like to. It seems like the CPG prices only go in kind of one direction.
Yeah, so I agree with you on all that as well, and so I don't see any change in that area really anytime soon. But I also have to agree with you. I will not be trying the mystery flavored Twinkies, especially because I've recently found out that mystery flavors a lot of times there's just a lot of flavors left over mixed in, and I don't know what that could mean for Twinkies, and I'm too afraid to find out.
Yeah, kind of the leftover, the whatever's left over.
Leftover cream.
So And another thing that could impact volume here is saw a lot published in the last week on the impact that the GLP-1 drugs have on grocery spending. A few different articles. I'll just talk about what I thought was the best one, which was this Food Business News article. And so this article talked about a study that was conducted by Cornell School of Business and Numerator, because it's a research firm, and they tracked households with at least one GLP user, tracked their spending in the 6 months before starting the treatment, and then 6 months after starting the treatment, and just looked at the change in spending. And they found that these households, for the entire household, and this is maybe one person in the household who's using the drugs, reduced grocery spending by 5.5%. That equates to a $416 annual reduction per household, led to fewer purchases of what they call indulgent purchases, which would be things like Oreos, and rather than actually eating healthier. So I didn't necessarily see more purchases of fruits and vegetables, but just less what I would call junk food, and similar results, whether the drugs are being used for diabetes or weight management. And they said the higher income households had about 8.6% decrease. Maybe they were just buying more just to start with. That was about 2 times the reduction of lower income households in terms of the reduction of spending as a result of taking these drugs. And some of the other articles that have come out do say, I mean, some of the biggest losers is the packaged food industry. Another one said that the category that is the biggest loser from these GLP drugs is the convenience stores. And that sort of makes sense. Those are more impulsive purchases that just kind of make if you're craving something. And then Goldman Sachs said it thinks that 13% of the U.S. population could be on the drugs by 2030. And a lot of this has been reflected in the stock prices of certain stocks like Mondelez, or maker of Oreo cookies, among many other things. Stocks down 12% in the last 2 years, while the S&P is up 46.68%, although that number might be a little stale as of today, a little down in the market, another down day in the market today. So, I mean, it does seem like if you're CPG company, you have to bake these into your projections, I would think.
Yeah, actually, I'll speak on my own personal self. I've been taking one of these drugs since beginning of August and down 45 pounds, loving it.
Oh, great.
And I
Congratulations.
will say, yeah, I will say I've seen even in my own grocery spending about somewhere between, I'd say even closer to like 10%, just because I mean, you're 100% right. You're definitely more mindful of what you're consuming, and what I am buying is actually like more of kind of these like Kroger does these really great like pre-done meals. So like things where I'm like, okay, I know exactly my calorie count, I know what's going in, and I'm not adding, an extra side, or I'm not. Chips was like brought up, right? If I'm not adding chips, I'm not adding these extras. I will also say, from the number of people I've talked to, condiments I think is huge as well. Like you kind of eliminate these small things that really start to stack up just because you realize you aren't craving them or really truly need them. So condiments, and even down to like creamers and just like these different small things I think are also worrisome, well, right? For these companies, these like add-ons to what the main meal would have been. I will say one thing that we talked about in the past that was a trend was a lot of these companies kind of like making these snack size items, these like quick to go. I love that kind of stuff. Anything that's like, already put together. This package is 100 calories, something that's simple. I don't need to count out, and I just know. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we see more of like those trends, like these like healthier small snacks I can buy in bulk more. But you're right, like I'm not going to convenience stores to buy those, and being more mindful of where I'm picking up and purchasing food. So I can say pretty much everything that you just listed off, everything that was in that article. I also would back and say that from experience, it's absolutely true. So, and I know more and more people every day that are purchasing or getting this drug, and our purchasing habits are changing as well. So, I have to agree, and I think honestly, I think 13%, depending on how long we're on this and how more maybe I don't want to say less regulated, but more access to these drugs. That 13% I think could even climb a little bit higher. To be honest with you.
Would agree for sure. Yeah. So we hope those drugs help lots of people, and believe we're just about out of time for today. I'll put the other stuff we didn't get to, which was a lot of it, in the newsletter, and hope everyone has a great day.